Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 29th of September 2014, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson.
Afternoon.
And of course, we have Nick with us on the technical desk. Well, I'd just like to say the corgis are happy in UK because apparently the weather in Pembrokeshire is pretty good, but we haven't got any reports from elsewhere in the country that I can read.
Well, apparently it is sunny in the northeast.
It's sunny in the northeast. It's a bit grey, but still dry in Plymouth. A little bit gloomy, actually, which is probably what the what the news is like. And of course, we're going to start with David Cameron and war and more war.
Yep. So last week we mentioned the Khorasan Group, which is the new fake terror organisation, which is there to strike fear in the hearts of every right-minded Westerner, because they're going to target US aviation in particular. And we said last week that this was just another loaded nonsense of the 1984 style. And indeed, Glenn Greenwald now has published this article, suggest you go and read it, saying basically the same thing. So not really much more to say about that. This is being called out, even in the mainstream, as being another scam.
And a very important article for us today because, of course, it brings us back into the Al Qaeda arena, so that we can start to have a look at what the government has been saying about Al Qaeda and who's been involved with links to Al Qaeda.
Indeed. Now, of course, on Friday, when you did the news, the vote had not yet been counted. It was counted, and I suppose we should mention that 524 votes in favour and 43 against going to strike, allegedly, the Islamic State in Iraq. And really, what can you say about this? A bunch of idiots, not really understanding the minds of their population, I suspect. But the only voice of reason that I could see in the Parliament was George Galloway, and his main point was that ISIL, ISIS, whatever you want to call it, it is not an army that we're supposedly fighting here. He was pointing out that ISIS in Iraq is about 10,000 people spread across an area the size of the UK, and so he was asking, what are we going to bomb? They have no bases to bomb. We're being told that we're going to bomb some bases, but we don't actually have any. They don't have any bases to bomb. So, but of course, that's if we bomb anything at all, because in fact, the tornadoes sent out at the weekend didn't actually drop any bombs. Maybe that's because we don't have too many to spare. The Foreign Office did say, they made a statement. They said, although on this occasion no targets were identified as requiring immediate air attack by our aircraft, the intelligence gathered by the tornado's highly sophisticated surveillance equipment will be invaluable to the Iraqi authorities and their coalition partners in developing the best possible understanding of ISIL's disposition and help acquire potential targets for future operations, either by aircraft or Iraqi ground forces. How do you identify, even with sophisticated surveillance equipment, 10,000 people spread amongst thousands of others in an area the size of the UK?
Well, Mike, the whole thing is, of course, complete nonsense. But look what Mr. Cameron has done. He's got 524 particularly stupid MPs to vote for military action against targets and threats which he still can't define. So we're moving assets, we're spending public money in order to get yet more attacks in against who? It's baseless.
Yes.
There's a bit of humour there, but inappropriate, so I'll apologise for that.
Okay. Needless to say, Sergei Lavrov really starting to get a bit hacked off now. And he was in the Security Council over the weekend. He said, he was talking about the United States mainly, of course, but I suppose this equally applies to the United Kingdom. He said, Washington has openly declared its right to use military force unilaterally and wherever it sees fit in order to protect its own interests. Military involvement has become normal, even though all military operations launched by the United States in recent years have been unfortunate. That's an understatement. He was talking about Yugoslavia, Iraq, Libya, Afghanistan as examples, and he really criticised the lack of diplomatic efforts in these areas. And he said, one cannot help but feel that the goal of various colour revolutions and other operations aimed at political regime change is to provoke chaos and instability. And in fact, you'd be absolutely right. Since Britain, in fact, wrote the book on this divide and conquer, each against the other policy, it was written by General Sir Frank Kitson in the 1960s. There's a couple of books. Gangs and Counter Gangs is a good one, and Low Insurgency Warfare is another good one. So have a read at those if you haven't come across them before. You need to get them from your library because although they're still available, they're pretty expensive. But Lavrov, not really mincing his words, and
sorry, was that me?
No, it's okay. Really pretty critical of this unilateral use of force, and they're getting increasingly twitchy about it, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, fantastic, isn't it? So David Cameron was in one of the papers over the weekend. I think it was the Telegraph, and he was calmly saying, well, if I think I should use military force overseas, I'll do it. I don't need to consult Parliament. So here you've got something unbelievably dangerous going on. We've got David Cameron calmly thinking that the military are there for his private toy soldiers. And of course, the other thing that Cameron's been saying to the UN is that anybody who dares challenge the British government view on things is probably a dangerous terrorist themselves. So we're sitting here. Actually, Mr. Cameron, we think that you and your government equate to domestic terrorists. And we're going to follow on with the story of Brooks Newmark. And I think we may surprise a few people with what we think is really going on. So here we are. Sunday Mirror, Tory minister quits over sex photo. And the Sunday Mirror really spelt out what had actually been going on with Mr. Newmark and his correspondence with a young lady who he thought was prepared to take her clothes off and meet up with him. But we'll add to it the Mail. Here we are. The blonde PR girl who brought down a minister. Tory sent explicit pictures of himself in his paisley pyjamas. So he stepped down as Minister for Civil Society.
But he hasn't had the honesty to actually resign as an MP.
No, they talk as though he has resigned as an MP, but all he's done is step down in his role as Minister for Civil Society. That's quite right. Of course, what was going on is a lot of the reports were mixing it up with Mr. Mark Reckless defecting from the Tories to UKIP. But let's just get into the rather unpleasant nitty-gritty of what was going on. So Mr. Newmark exchanged public messages with the journalist about this year's Wimbledon Tory before beginning a series of private conversations via the online chat service WhatsApp. In the early hours of July 17, the MP and the reporter for the Sunday Mail swapped increasingly explicit photographs. Miss Whittam's, pictured there, sent a naked picture along with a plea that he would not show it to anyone else. Mr. Newmark replied, "You must be kidding, I'd never do that. But resend without your hand in the way and your legs parted, and I will send you something in return. That way we both have a secret." He added, "Assuming it meets my request and I reciprocate, you must swear on a stack of Bibles you won't show pics, as I promise not to show pics of you." Okay, now let's remember that this is a Tory minister speaking. Some of the newspapers have already tried to say, well, this was a sting operation, he was fitted up. But in fact, there were a number of other MPs, I think it was 5 altogether, also subjected to this sting. But of course, they were mature individuals and they simply responded with a polite put you down. So,
well, maturer anyway. Like mental age of 15 rather than 10?
Well, probably,
yeah.
Okay. But the key point is that the argument that this is a sting, so we should all be really sympathetic for Brooks Newmark, just doesn't stack up because other parliamentary colleagues acted in a roughly mature way and didn't get caught. But this is the press at their best, so at least the Independent here had the guts to say, well, if it wasn't for the allure of UKIP, and they're referring obviously to Mark Reckless stepping across from the Tories to UKIP, Brooks Newmark would be all over the press. Well, he deserves to be all over the press. Let's think about this. This man was prepared to betray his wife and family utterly. And so our question is, isn't this man going to betray anybody in the rest of his dealings? So let's come back to what sort of man Brooks Newmark is. And this is something we've shown before because, yes, he likes tweeting. And here he is, that he's going to be on BBC Essex. This is an old historical tweet. He'll be on BBC Essex this morning discussing his new role as Cabinet Office Minister responsible for charities and the voluntary sector. And here we are with yet more. And of course, he's saying that he's going to help make social change. So let's remember what we now know about this man. He'll deceive his wife and family in order to get a bit of kinky sexual pleasure out of a young lady. He thinks he can't be seen. So we can ask ourselves, just what sort of social change does Brooks Newmark want to achieve? Well, of course, this is the sort of hypocrisy because this is the public political face of Brooks Newmark. Very big. This is up in Cumbria, I believe. This man involved with Girl Guides, but publicly, this is a trusted family man. You can believe what he says, morally upstanding. But the reality, of course, is horribly different. Here's the private conservative political face of Tory Brooks Newmark. Well, why are we interested in this man? Let's have a look at some of the things he said. Brooks Newmark, charities should keep out of politics, and he was rude enough to say that charities should stick to knitting and stay out of the realm of politics. Well, this is a very interesting statement because, of course, his boss, David Cameron, is a glowing supporter of one of the most dangerous charities going, the political charity Common Purpose. In the lower left picture there, David Cameron is helping to sell Common Purpose activities in India. And this was picked up by a few of the newspapers. So here's the Telegraph saying that the Prime Minister faces questions over links to charity. They're not links. David Cameron is actively promoting Common Purpose.
He even wears the same colour tie.
He even wears the same colour tie. He's looking a little bit confused there. He's probably trying to think. So we want to say, is Brooks Newmark so ignorant that he doesn't know that David Cameron is supporting one of the most dangerous political charities in UK? Or is he just deliberately deceiving the public? Really, we need to say to David Cameron, does David Cameron think that the general public is so ignorant they cannot see his duplicity with political charities? But here we are, the moment we look at the Tory party, whether it's David Cameron or Brooks Newmark, deceiving the public, ignorant or lying, or all three. So where does that take us? Well, it takes us back into war and more war. And let's remind people of articles that appeared back in 2013. So this is Brooks Newmark ripping into Assad, saying that he knows him. He's had tea with him and his wife. And this produced some very interesting information, which only the UK column followed through. So the caption there, while I abhor the Assad regime and its hostility towards Israel, brackets, I am Jewish, I have a long-standing interest in Syria and the Middle East, and I'm a firm believer in the adage, diplomacy becomes a little lazy if all you do is talk to your friends. Well, if Assad thought he was talking to a friend, it was actually a pretty perverted friend. But this is the meat of it, because in his article, Newmark ramped up the rhetoric against Assad, claiming that Assad was willing to destroy Syria, kill its people. Syria's a mafia state. Assad is only interested in his survival. And according to Brooks Newmark, who is not medically qualified, Assad is bipolar. The real sting, though, is the follow-up comment. This is not Iraq. In Iraq, there were no chemical weapons. In Syria, we know for sure that Assad has used them. Now, the moment we read that comment, we got on the telephone to Brooks Newmark. We were able to speak to him personally, and we asked him to simply provide his evidence for the certain use of chemical weapons by Assad. And what we got was utter bluster and obfuscation. He said it was reported by the UN. Well, that was untrue, because the only reports the UN have ever made have been to do with allegations of the use of chemical weapons. The second, he was told about it by an individual in the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. We asked for the name of that person and he didn't want to say. And then he said that Portland Down had reported the certain use of chemical weapons, which was also untrue because even the Portland Down reports had spoken of alleged use of chemical weapons. So here we have, now we know the man's prepared to betray his family. Is he prepared to betray the British public in not telling the truth over the use of chemical weapons? Well, the report appeared in a number of papers aside from the Daily Mail. This was the Essex Chronicle. And here they were talking about a visit that Mr. Newmark made to the Turkish-Syrian border, where he met up with General Idris of the Free Syrian Army. This is in September, it was in the second half of August 2013 into September. And just so that we know we're dealing with evidence, here is the man himself tweeting that he's had a busy day, presumably not taking pictures of himself in his pyjamas, meeting the Syrian opposition, including General Idris and President Saba. Assad's 14th chemical weapons attack is the tipping point in the civil war. Absolutely no evidence produced by Brooks Newmark to support the allegations of chemical weapons. Now, the interesting thing is you did a bit of work on this, Mike, and the article seems to have disappeared.
Well, he followed up on this with an article in the Mail. And the article was called, "I'm sorry, General, we have let you down." And strangely enough, that article is no longer on the Daily Mail website. That was posted on Saturday, August the 31st. And that article's not there anymore. So I went and had a look at this website, newslookup.com, which keeps cached copies. It's a bit like Google Cache, except they focus on newspapers specifically, and they keep track of how articles change over time. And oh look, at the request of the publisher or their representative, this historical cached copy has been blocked. So this story is no longer available on the Daily Mail website, and the Daily Mail seems to have gone to some efforts to make sure that it is not available on any of the various caching websites either. And I find that a fascinating state of affairs.
Do you think that Brooks Newmark has been caught in a deliberate sting because he absolutely cocked up over talking about factual evidence of chemical weapons when there wasn't any?
Who knows?
Who knows?
Who knows?
Well, luckily, Global Research at the time was putting out some pretty good analysis on what was actually happening around Syria and chemical weapons. And if we can just bring this on the screen, here we are. Did the White House help plan the Syrian chemical attack? So we're getting into some pretty mucky stuff here. Assad absolutely hammered in the press. No evidence, no factual evidence produced by the UN, Portland Down. Nowhere was there any factual evidence, and that is still the case today. If we expand this a bit, let's have a look at this paragraph. On August the 13th to the 14th, 2013, Western-sponsored opposition forces in Turkey started advanced preparations for a major and irregular military surge. Initial meetings between senior opposition military commanders and representatives of Qatari, Turkish and US intelligence took place at the converted Turkish military garrison in Antakya, Hatay province, used as the command centre and headquarters of the Free Syrian Army and their foreign sponsors. Very senior opposition commanders who had arrived from Istanbul briefed the regional commanders of an imminent escalation in the fighting due to a war-changing development which would in turn lead to US-led bombing of Syria. So we were curious as to whether this was actually related to these accusations of chemical weapons, and we became very curious as to whether this was the meeting that Brooks Newmark had attended. So if we put this together, we've shown this before, but now we're getting a better idea of the type of man Brooks Newmark is. So he said he was on the Syrian border last week, that's from the 19th of August 2013, where he met General Idris, the leader of the Syrian Free Army. His the general himself. And Newmark's told General Idris, hopefully airstrikes and missiles will soon be raining down on Assad's military infrastructure. So how did Brooks Newmark know that? And that's a pretty bloody thing to say, because he was simply saying, I can't wait for the bloodshed to start. But this is what Mr. Newmark's also said. There are about 150,000 Free Syrian Army fighters and 7,500 Jabhat al-Nusra fighters, which have links to Al-Qaeda. So here was Brooks Newmark meeting with somebody who was linked to the very terrorist organisations that we are now supposedly fighting.
And according to the Global Research article, the Qataris were there, who are still, it's provable, are still funding ISIS.
Yeah.
So this whole ISIS thing has come out of this meeting in Syria that Brooks Newmark attended, it looks like. Is that an unfair statement?
I think so. Well, what we're certainly raising is a lot of questions. Let's keep asking the questions, and let's see whether David Cameron's administration is going to answer the questions. So if we complete our little wiring diagram, as it's known, here's General Idris, Syrian Free Army, linked to Al-Qaeda. How do we know that? Because Brooks Newmark said so in his article. So now we've got David Cameron linked through to the Syrian Free Army and therefore through to Al-Qaeda. Cameron said Syria is attracting and empowering a new cohort of Al-Qaeda linked extremists. We don't know how David Cameron knew that, but of course his word is to be believed at all occasions.
But you would know it if you were funding them.
If you were funding it, you probably would. Yeah. But here's the answer. The Secret Intelligence Service, the most significant terrorist threat to UK and its interests overseas, comes from Al-Qaeda senior leadership. So hang on a minute. We're ramping up for this massive attack. We've got Brooks Newmark, a Conservative politician, and he's there meeting people who are linked to Al-Qaeda. So the question is the British Conservative Party now assisting Al-Qaeda? We think it is. And let's look at how it went with Brooks Newmark. So he did his Mail on Sunday, 1st September 2013 article. We got in contact with him. We said, please, can you tell me in what official capacity you met General Idris, leader of the Free Syrian Army? You clearly state there are links between Jabhat al-Nusra, the group allied with forces of General Idris, and Al-Qaeda terrorists. Please, can you explain what these Al-Qaeda links are? Well, actually, we didn't get much back. So what we did is we spoke to our Conservative local MP, Gary Streeter, and we asked him to speak to Brooks Newmark to ascertain what were the names of the individuals and their status organisations that were present in the meetings that Mr. Newmark attended with General Idris. What we got from Mr. Streeter was what I like to call dross. He said Syria appears to be moving in a different direction, things were moving on, and he didn't think there was any need for any further dialogue. Well, we did. This is the gentleman, Gary Streeter, very well-known backbencher, avid Tory and, of course, Christian. We wrote to his local Conservative association asking for their help in getting a response from Gary Streeter. We asked the same questions, so we wanted Streeter to find out what Brooks was doing, what capacity he met General Idris, and we wanted to know who he met. What did we get? Well, we got nothing. So there we are. These are the questions that we think Brooks Newmark must still answer. Nothing to do with his Paisley pyjamas or intimate pictures of his reproductive equipment. We think he should be answering this. In what capacity, official or private, did you meet Syrian Free Army General Idris? Who was present in that meeting? Was this meeting sanctioned by David Cameron? If not, who sanctioned it? What exactly do you know about links between the forces of General Idris and Al-Qaeda? And are you aware that Al-Qaeda is a terrorist organisation? And who paid for the trip and the meeting? And we'd be grateful if perhaps some other members of the public might like to follow that through and start asking their own MPs to really find out what sort of man Brooks Newmark is and what he was doing in a very volatile area of the Middle East.
Now, of course, despite the fact that he's resigned from his cabinet post, he's still tweeting like crazy today. So, anybody wants to ask those questions on Twitter so that lots of other people can see. That might be sensible.
Yeah. So no shame then with Brooks Newmark.
No.
You get picked up for explicit photographs. You said swear on the Bible. Well, that's a pretty interesting statement from him. And then Monday morning you carry on as nothing has happened because you're obviously suited to be a Tory MP. If you want the credentials to be one of David Cameron's Tory MPs, where you're going to betray your family, you're going to get involved in a little bit of online nookie, and you're going to be heavily involved in pretty dodgy overseas politics, which is going to result in the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people. Nice. Vote Tory.
Indeed. Okay, change the subject then. We're moving to Hong Kong. The Foreign Office is watching events in Hong Kong with concern, and perhaps they might. They're saying that it's monitoring events in Hong Kong with concern and is monitoring events carefully. Excellent. And as well they might, since it's very likely they were significantly involved in kicking the whole thing off in the first place. Just a bit of background here. Here's a photograph of the crowds out yesterday. China announced that they would be proposing electoral reform over the vote for Hong Kong's chief executive. And this announcement sparked criticism because China intended to retain the right to screen candidates in advance. And as a result, as you can see, people have been coming out on the streets. But while this has been happening, of course, there's been no criticism of China from King David or his cohorts, except for this one. And that has drawn criticism from none other than the great occupier and democratic figurehead, Chris Patten, because, of course, he was the last occupier of Hong Kong himself, wasn't he? And he penned an article, not this particular one related to this, for the Financial Times. And he said, sooner or later, I assume the British government will comment on Beijing's plan. He went on, this would not be provocative, but a duty. No one can seriously believe that this would have commercial consequences or that such consequences would be an overriding concern when our honour is on the line. His honour? Does he have any?
Well, the other bit I just picked up here, he's talking about moral responsibilities. Former British saying Britain has a moral responsibility to speak out. Is that a sort of moral responsibility a la Brooks Newmark?
Indeed.
Perhaps they should tweet a few photographs to the Beijing administration.
Indeed. Well, this is, of course, the mainstream media has jumped on these protests, and of course it's being presented as a great pro-democracy protest. Just like Ukraine or Syria or Egypt. And of course, they're criticising the Chinese government and the Chinese police for their behaviour. Pepper spray here. Chinese police being criticised because, as everyone knows, this kind of thing would never happen in the United Kingdom. Never in a month of Sundays would it. We have the best management of protest in this country, don't we? Even when protest is allowed. Now, the underlying issue that China is potentially vetting candidates, that wouldn't happen in this country either, would it? Because, of course, Tories don't vet candidates or perhaps push candidates onto constituencies in this country. The hypocrisy here is unbelievable, isn't it?
We're having more and more problems with the news, Mike, aren't we? Because we don't know what to say anymore because it is so obvious we're being governed by complete liars, cheats, fraudsters and perverts. And once you see it, what do you say? Well, we keep going anyway. I've said my bit.
So anyway, what's this really about? Well, what it's really about is there's an attempt to incite, we might call it a colour revolution. It's very much what has just happened in Ukraine, the kind of thing that happened in Egypt recently, the sort of thing that happened in the Baltic states a number of years ago. And really, they're hoping that this pro-democracy, in inverted commas, protest is going to escalate throughout China and not just in Hong Kong. We might criticise the Chinese government. There's a lot to criticise them for. But what's this really about? I believe it's about BRICS. actually, and what's going on economically around the world, and it's an effort to stop this initiative, this anti-IMF World Bank initiative, and cause China such problems at home that they can't really be involved in anything overseas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Michael Gove there, in that picture we just had up on screen,
Yeah.
I think we should remind people, of course, that David Cameron boasted soon after coming into office that he was going to introduce psychometric testing for the Conservative Party. And the aim of that, of course, would be for the personality profiling, which would then enable the use of reframing, nudging by the Applied Behavioural Psychology Unit, Francis Maud, and the Cabinet Office, and of course their favourite political charity, Common Purpose. So it all fits. The other thing is, I think we should just give Mr. Gove a mention, because of course he was boasting on a London stage that he was a committed Zionist. So once again, we've got another gentleman whose loyalty appears to be Israel alongside David Cameron, and not to the good people of the British Isles.
Right. We'll move on.
Yes, it's not good news, is it? We're on to tax now, I think.
Yeah, HMRC. So they're now going to, now that they can take money from people's bank accounts directly, that's not sufficient for them. They're now going to, they've now decided that they have the power to change people's tax codes, so that if you happen to owe them any money, that they can take it out in installments through your through the PAYE system and through your tax code. And they're wanting to collect. Well, in fact, they're not wanting to. They are, as of today, they are able to collect up to £17,000 a year of tax debts, well, what they say are debts, and that's up from £3,000 a year. So no doubt, they've got this limit of having to leave £5,000 in your bank account if they're taking money directly from that. No doubt that figure will change over time as well. What can you really say about it? HMRC, I'll just tell you what they said about it. They said taxpayers welcome the option to have tax debt collected by instalment. This is a very long-standing feature of the payroll system, but the increase in the current threshold will allow more tax debts to be paid this way. That's good, isn't it?
Well, I think it is good. I think basically the sooner people just accept that they're complete sheep for the slaughter, the easier it's going to be for all of us. So, it's all there in front of our eyes. Can we stop it? Yes, but we need to stop consenting to what these people are doing.
Yes. Right, my second favourite subject, obviously windmills is my favourite subject, but this is my second favourite subject because this is another ridiculous project. Here we've got solar panels installed floating on a lake, 1 acre of them, and it's providing a massive 200 kilowatts in an acre. That's fantastic. That's about 50 watts per square yard. That's a good use of. He's saying that because it's on a lake, he's not having to giving farmland over to it. So there's that at least. But nonetheless, this guy is going to make a fortune out of the taxpayer here, because this would not be making a profit if it were not for the government subsidies, the green taxes that we're all being charged, and our money going into the hands of this private individual, our tax money going into the hands of this private individual, because he's decided to have some solar panels floating on a lake. Really, from an economic point of view, this is insane, because if he's doing this, other farmers are giving farming land across to this, and at 50 watts a square yard or square meter, whatever your preference is, it's not really a practical solution to anything.
Interesting, Mike, isn't it? Though you hear virtually nothing now on the global warming, the baseline for all of this nonsense. The government doesn't even want to go near the subject of global warming because most people are simply laughing at it. But here's the taxpayer paying as a result of the initial lies over global warming.
Well, they're not only that, he's getting some of that energy is going into his property, some of it's going back into the grid, but of course he's getting that subsidy is just huge. It's not something that he's going to be making a profit that he wouldn't otherwise make.
Can we thank all of those who are subsidising this man? Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, this is the reality. Never mind China. House arrest in England, and of course it's Robert Greene. I sometimes lose track. There are so many days, but I think today is the 132nd. I've got a th in there, sorry, day. So it just goes on and on. Some good news, it would appear, on the horizon. I understand that Robert has now been given legal aid for junior counsel. I think that means that the Scottish Government is prepared for him to have a solicitor. They're happy to have other senior establishment people north of the border use public money for their barristers in their cases, but it does appear there's been some movement on Robert. Of course, still no details on the charges against him, and he's patiently waiting under house arrest for his trial in January 2015. So are we talking about China? No, we're talking about David Cameron's UK, complete breakdown of law and order, and a junta running Scotland. And we'll remind you, of course, about Melanie Shaw. Obviously, we've shown this before, but amazing how many people in the public sector can gang up on a child abuse victim and whistleblower. So all of these individuals doing their job to make sure that a child abuse victim stays in prison with no evidence that the public's seen. Remember, that's routine, that she was told she had a hearing at 6 in the morning, and strangely there's a lady inside a secret court who was offered to take on Melanie's case. So we're waiting with bated breath to see whether the new legal team is going to put in an application for bail for Melanie. We've also had absolutely no further interest from mainstream press and media, so a flurry of calls. They were given good factual information about Melanie Shaw, and what's come about? Nothing. So it appears that there is a full UK-wide press and media clampdown on the Melanie Shaw case. Total silence from MPs, with the exception of one lady. I'm not going to name her on this programme. We communicated with her this morning. We're now waiting to see whether we do have one single MP who's prepared to stand up and be counted with regard to Melanie Shaw. But can we just say that one of the scams that British politicians use to avoid helping victims of crime is they tell us we can't get involved, the person is not one of our constituents, and the gentleman's old boy agreement from Westminster is we can only deal with our constituents. It's remarkable then that 524 MPs can crowd into Westminster in order to deal with problems relating to criminal activity, supposedly about 3,000 miles away. Strange that, isn't it? Okay, what have we got on? Well, we're trying to do something about it.
Yeah, let's just remember the conferences happening on the 1st and 2nd of November 2014, and just there's the website to go and get tickets. But if you are a member of the British Constitution Group and want to take advantage of discounts for members, please make sure you log into the BCG website in order to get your tickets. That's really all I want to say on that. Doomwatch from Friday night is following this programme. If you didn't see it on Friday, there's another chance to see it. Well, that was a pretty good programme, so do watch if you get the chance.
Okay, well, doing something to prevent what's happening is very important, but we just want to show balance. We could be a news-like programme, but a television-like news programme. We've got to be very careful about that. But several people have said that quite often we're unkind to MPs. We disagree. We think we're particularly balanced in our analysis of the criminal perverts who are running the country. But we thought today we'd like to offer some sympathetic advice to MPs to help them with their future careers.
We've got to say well done to Pride's Purge for this. Absolutely brilliant
It's
little
the
piece.
guide to how to avoid accidentally taking pictures of your willy. A handy guide for MPs.
A handy guide? That's unfortunate.
Yeah. Okay, obviously this doesn't apply to lady MPs. That could be confusing.
Yes.
Unless they're ladyboy MPs, in which case it might be appropriate. Okay, there we are. We're ending with a little bit of black humour, but let's remember the facts. Here we have David, our King Cameron, in power, war, and more war, based on, it would appear to us, to be a pack of lies over who are the real terrorists. But do follow through on Brooks Newmark, and we really would appreciate you getting in touch with your MPs, and indeed perhaps Mr. Newmark, to ask him for details of his meeting with General Idris.
Join us at 7:30 tonight for the Crane Report and at 9 o'clock for Fracking Nightmare.
That's it. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.